If I asked, have you ever dropped your keys? I'm sure every person here would say, yes, of course. We all drop our keys. It's never intentional. It's something that happens to us. Sometimes we aren't even aware that we've dropped our keys until sometime later. We might rummage in our pocket, realise they're missing, and retrace our steps, only to find them in the shop we were in or somewhere in the house. Usually, well, assuming you do find them, there's no harm done. But what if you dropped your keys and someone else was harmed or even died as a result? In 1991, I qualified as a general nurse. I was really proud and delighted to realise my lifelong dream, but also a little afraid of the future. Because a year before I qualified, I had been involved in an unexpected medication event. I had given a patient a dose of insulin as prescribed. He was my patient, it was my job to give it, and I followed the rules to the letter, including using the 5 R's that guided us at that time: the right medication, the right dose, the right route, the right time, and the right patient. But it turned out that he'd already been given his evening dose of insulin 10 minutes before by my colleague. She had finished her work early and had decided to give me a head start, which would have been brilliant, except that she went off on her break and clean forgot to tell me. When I realised I had given him a duplicate dose of insulin, my soul almost left my body. My heart was pounding, I felt sick, and I thought, oh my God, I have killed my patient. We called a doctor to assess him, we took steps to make sure that his blood sugar remained stable, and we monitored him closely. Thankfully, he was fine, but that was just luck. And because he was lucky, I was lucky. I know not every patient and not every healthcare professional gets lucky and escapes serious harm from unexpected and unintended events. Ironically, if we had taken the shortcut that we'd been told not to take in any circumstances, which was to sign for a medication before we had given it, we would have picked up the error. Because of the embedded blame culture, the certain knowledge that we would have been dragged through punitive disciplinary procedures, the fear that we would have been put out on unpaid leave, the expectation that we would have been treated like vermin by the hierarchy, we didn't report the incident. We put all our focus into making sure our patient was okay, but no incident report went in about this. He was okay, we were barely okay, but there was no learning for our colleagues and the organisation, no figuring out where the gap was, and no measures put in place to protect other patients and other nurses from this happening again. A blame culture really is the biggest enemy of patient safety. I buried the event in the shame folder of my memory, and I tried not to think about it. In 2019, I was at a healthcare conference, and the keynote speaker there was the amazing Amanda Oates, who is an executive director of Merseycare NHS Foundation Trust, and she told stories of healthcare workers who had been harmed by disciplinary procedures. She explained that a significant number turned out to have no case to answer in the end, but had been scarred by the process. In fact, in the UK and Ireland, some healthcare professionals have taken their own lives, either during or after disciplinary investigations. Amanda described a new approach they had taken called restorative just culture, and very clearly outlined not just the ethical and moral case for this approach, but the tangible business case too. She knows this because I've told her she changed the course of my professional life and my personal development, because as I was sitting there listening to her, the memory that I had buried was alive in my gut again. I embarked on a journey to learn more. I started tentatively asking around, and to this day, I haven't yet come across a healthcare professional anywhere in the world who, when I say mine was insulin, doesn't reply in hushed tones with their own mine was. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me who'd felt sick to my stomach, lost sleep, fretting about a mistake, worrying about a patient, and filled with inappropriately internalised blame and shame. The vast majority of people who work in healthcare go in to do a good day's work, to relieve pain, to provide appropriate and evidence-based treatments, to provide comfort and reassurance to those facing serious health challenges. Very, very few get up in the morning and decide that they're going to intentionally harm someone today. But we all drop our keys. And it seems that little has changed since the day I dropped my keys. Near misses and incidents are still not being reported because of the name, blame and shame culture in our workplaces and throughout society. This is an enormous elephant in the room because it is often suffered in silence. Good people feel awful when they've accidentally harmed someone else, but they also feel alone and isolated too. They feel that they can't talk to anyone because they're sure they'll be judged harshly. The end result is more than an elephant in a room. It's an elephant in a china shop. Opportunities for improvements are missed, talented people quit their jobs, and we lose their expertise. Are patients given the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when something unexpected has happened during their care? I'm not so sure, because despite the introduction of open disclosure as a policy and in legislation and training for all staff on this, we are still seeing patients or their families forced to take legal action to get answers about unexpected events during their care. We see them on the steps of court, exhausted, and they all say, this wasn't about the money, this was the only way we could get answers. Healthcare workers are still afraid to report near misses and unexpected events. They'll often say, that's my PIN number on the line here. We're still seeing healthcare professionals suffer enormous stress from being put through punitive disciplinary procedures for something that was essentially a human error or a gap in system design. It's no good to them to maybe eventually be told they had no case to answer. The harm has been done by then. I can see that there are some good people working hard to change the culture, but for whatever reason, it's not changing direction quickly enough. For there to be open disclosure, there has to be full reporting. For there to be full reporting of all incidents, there has to be a culture of psychological safety, where people feel confident that not only will they not be punished, sacked or humiliated, but that they will be supported, cared for, and given an opportunity to be part of the learning and improvements. For there to be psychological safety, there has to be trust. There are 3 destructive effects on our physiology and our ability to trust when we are blamed and shamed. First, when we are triggered into a stress response, the parts of our brain that are needed for focus become impaired. Our innate stress response might save our life when we are in danger, but it becomes detrimental when we need to make choices that require thoughtful analysis. Second, it's known that when we've experienced incivility or rudeness, our cognitive function is reduced by 61%. And 98% of people report experiencing incivility at work. So 98% of us have had our focus reduced by 61% by someone else's incivility. And third, we are all hardwired to fit in with our peers and our community, so much so that the pain of social rejection is felt in the same part of the brain as physical pain. So blaming someone, making them feel ashamed, shouting at them, belittling them, or making them feel like their livelihood or credibility have been threatened, all have the effect of shutting down their brain so that they can't perform their job to the high standards they're usually capable of. What are we doing? Do we really want to do this to our frontline staff who need to be in tip-top health with their brains and bodies open for business, solving problems and acting quickly in life or death situations? We can easily track it back. A crossword, a raised eyebrow, a threat or implication of retribution, all quench any opportunity to learn from near misses and heal from actual outcomes. The real loss is in terms of patient safety through potential improvement in system design, so that we will catch errors downstream before they reach a patient. The ultimate victims are patients, and that's us. We're all patients at some point in our lives. It's estimated that 4.8 million people die each year from preventable errors in healthcare. Using those figures, we can assume that in the 30 years since the unexpected medication event I got caught up in, 144 million people have died from preventable errors in healthcare. And that's the number we know about. That doesn't include those who were harmed but who survived, and it doesn't include healthcare professionals who have taken their own lives as a result of the stigma and shame associated with a mistake when they dropped their keys. How many of those deaths would have been avoided if similar near-miss events had been reported and had resulted in improvements in system design or training? We'll never know, but we could reduce those numbers in the future if we stop blame cultures and embed just and learning cultures. Now, sometimes a healthcare professional or organisation does have a case to answer where they do have to be accountable for poor decisions or behavioural choices. But we have well-oiled justice systems and fitness to practice processes to deal with those. They may be too well-oiled. Dropping your keys doesn't belong in those systems. It belongs in a just and learning culture. So how do we replace blame cultures with just and learning cultures? Well, instead of first asking whose fault it was and how will we punish them, we need to stop and think and ask, who was harmed? What are their needs? Let's meet those needs and let's all learn and move forward together. I asked earlier how you'd feel if you dropped your keys and someone else was harmed or died as a result. Now that outcome is quite dramatic, but similar situations happen in other sectors. What if you had too much to carry and it was almost impossible not to drop your keys, but you were made to feel incompetent if you did? What if your keys were covered in grease and almost impossible to hold, and you were fired by the employers who put the grease on them? What if you dropped your keys, someone else was harmed, and your employers throw you under the bus, letting you take all the heat and letting you pay the highest price in terms of your career and mental well-being? What is the equivalent of dropping your keys in your workplace? In the financial sector, it could be putting the decimal point in the wrong place and costing the company or client money. In manufacturing, it could be any lapse of focus or concentration on a production line. In construction, it's the same. Mining, shipping, engineering, aviation, there are lots of workplaces that are risky to work in, where employees go in to do a good day's work, but where they might drop their keys. We can do better than this, but it's going to take conscious effort, and every one of us needs to put our shoulders to the wheel. We are all inclined to judge others quickly because of our evolution and our primal need for survival. But we all also have a primal need to belong and to feel like we're accepted in our community. We all need to be shown kindness and compassion when we're facing a challenge. To make that part of our culture, we need to show kindness and compassion to each other, even when it's difficult to do that. In fact, especially when it's difficult to do that. It's natural for us to feel frustrated when we think someone could have done better. I feel that too. But our words, our body language, our tone of voice, and our facial expressions can ripple out and impact someone more than we could imagine. Turning the tide of a really embedded blame culture might feel a bit like trying to turn the Titanic with a spoon. But you know, with enough spoons, maybe the Titanic might have been turned away from that iceberg. We can all eradicate blame cultures by being extra kind to people who've dropped their keys. So when someone beside you drops their keys, or whatever form that takes in your workplace, pick them up. We do that by first asking if they're okay, and then asking if everyone else involved is okay, and then saying, "I'm really glad you told me, thank you. Now let's figure this out together." For the rest of my life, I'm going to keep working on myself to make sure that that's my default response. I invite you to join me in helping others pick up their keys. Thank you.